Hello, welcome back. If you're new today, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a yoga teacher, meditation teacher, certified Kilobi inquiries facilitator. I also do some sound healing, kirtan. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, then please subscribe to the channel. So today I wanted to speak about spirituality. What's not spiritual? What is spiritual? In Zen, we have a saying, and if you are unaware of my background, my introduction to spirituality was really through the Zen tradition, if you want to call it that. One could argue that Zen doesn't even really exist if one understands it in the right way. But this saying is that there is no distinction or difference between the sacred and the profane. And this can really be a difficult thing to understand, and many people may want to object to this idea or this statement. Many of us want to believe, of course, there's spiritual and unspiritual behavior. Of course, there's spiritual and unspiritual things, right? An automobile isn't spiritual, but a temple is. So how are we to understand this? Because it seems like Zen is a spiritual tradition, and then it seems like Lehman Brothers isn't. And this can only be understood if we understand the perspective of Zen and other non-dual schools of spirituality. So non-dual means not two. In Zen, we have another great saying, not one, not two. And this is the essence of what I'm speaking about today. No difference between sacred and profane, not one, not two. So for human beings, the way our mind tends to work, the way our mind tries to structure reality, really isn't how reality actually is. This is important for us to understand. I'm not saying that the way you're experiencing reality is wrong or bad or evil or any of those things, but it is not how reality actually is structured. It's not how reality actually is. And this is important for us to understand. The way the human brain is wired and structured is to benefit the human race. It's not to see actual truth or to see or perceive reality as it is. And again, this is a very important concept for us to grasp, because if we think that it is, then we will think we're perceiving reality as it is, we're seeing the truth, and we're not. The reality is we're seeing things in a way that benefits, again, the human race. It might benefit you personally, or it might benefit, again, the human species as a whole, but it isn't necessarily reality as it is. So these statements that there's no difference between the sacred and the profane, not one, not two, these again are non-dual statements. These are statements that are pointing to a deeper truth than we tend to experience as human beings. So the way our brain tends to work is it tends to divide up reality. And it does that so it can better understand reality or deal with reality. That's a good way of thinking of it, that the human brain, the human mind is trying to deal with reality. So reality as it is just too complex. It's too difficult. There's too many moving parts. So the human brain, one of the strategies that it's come up with is to divide. To look at reality and say, well, these things are dangerous. These things are not dangerous. These things are helpful. These things are not helpful. These things are sacred. These things are profane or secular, or however you want to think of it. So again, this isn't evil. It isn't bad, but it's not true. This is important for us to understand. One way of thinking about spirituality, in my experience, is spirituality is trying to point us to a deeper truth that underlies what our brains, the way our brains interpret reality. So again, our brains are just trying to interpret and understand reality, trying to help us survive, trying to help us thrive. And so, again, one of the processes that the brain does is it chops up or divides up reality. And it can do this in many ways, and it can chop up reality into really, really small bits. But very often, it will chop things up into two: good and bad, right and wrong, left and right, night and day, up and down, man and woman, all these types of concepts or ideas that are familiar to all of us. And try as you might, your brain will basically default to doing this. It will basically do it automatically. And as I said, there's nothing ultimately evil or wrong or bad about this, but we just have to recognize that it's not really actually true. So what these Zen statements are pointing to is that the reality is that if anything is spiritual, everything is ultimately spiritual. Now, this is only true or to be understood when we reach a certain level of spiritual experience or understanding. And this is an important distinction to make. The Zen tradition is pointing to ultimate truth, okay? And for a lot of people, they're just not ready for ultimate truth. And that, again, it does not mean that they are bad or deficient or evil or that they need to change, okay? But we have to recognize the truth of this statement. And I'll give you an analogy. If a child who's ready for kindergarten is taken to a university and enrolled in an advanced physics course, do you think the child will get any benefit or understand any of the concepts being presented in the course? The answer, of course, is no. The child will be completely lost and bored, and they might actually disrupt the class. This is just the reality. Does that mean there's something wrong with the child? No. Does it mean that there's something wrong with the class? No. But it does mean that the child doesn't belong in that class. And one of the challenges I see in spirituality as a teacher, and one of the confusions I see happening, is very often spirituality is presented in a one-size-fits-all type way. And so the idea that what is true or what is something that one person can benefit from, everybody can benefit from that. And in my experience, this simply isn't true. And this is a harmful concept or idea. So ideally, we are able to recognize or understand what is for us and what is not. Now, this concept of not one, not two, or no difference between sacred and profane, again, a very, very advanced concept. You might say there aren't many concepts more advanced in spirituality than that one. So, if this is not a concept that I'm ready to understand spiritually, I will basically feel like that child that is in the physics class. And again, it doesn't mean the child is evil or bad or wrong or stupid or anything like that. It just means the child is not ready to digest or understand those concepts. Their brain is not developed enough, and they have not been introduced to concepts like mathematics, just basic mathematics that would allow them to understand what's happening in that course. So this is what happens to many in spirituality. They enter into spirituality, and again, very often it's presented as a one-size-fits-all type thing. Now, just because we would call physics more advanced, or physics would require a deeper level of basic understanding, again, it doesn't mean that physics is better than mathematics. In fact, you need mathematics to understand advanced physics. Advanced physics doesn't exist without mathematics. So this is with the concept of duality and non-duality. In spirituality, there are many, many traditions, including forms of yoga, classical yoga, for instance, where duality is presented as a sort of basic tenet or truth. Oftentimes in Christian traditions, duality is the norm. There are non-dual Christian schools or teachings, but most Christians understand their concept of God or reality in dualistic terms. So, I am here, I am a sinner, God is out there, God is separate from me, and God is pure, spiritual, and that would include Jesus and the Holy Spirit. But I am a born sinner, and the only way that I can have redemption is through Jesus. Now, there is a lot of spiritual truth in these statements, but they can be understood in a non-dual way, and that's how I understand them. So again, if I were talking with a Christian with a dualistic conception, then we would likely be talking past one another. We would not be seeing eye to eye. And again, this does not mean that their conception or idea is wrong. It just means that they are seeing things from a certain level of understanding. And from that perspective, what they understand seems right. And in spirituality, age doesn't really matter. We can be advanced in years, in our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or beyond. And spiritually speaking, we can be like an infant. We can be just taking our baby steps spiritually. And that has nothing to do with how long you've been involved in spirituality. So you may have been part of a spiritual tradition your entire life, and now you're 90. That does not mean that you have spiritual wisdom. That does not mean that you've matured spiritually. Physically, yes, you've matured. Maybe cognitively, you've matured. That does not guarantee that you've matured spiritually. Sorry, it's just the way that it is. I've also found I've met people who are very young. They might be in their 20s or even younger. And yet I can see the seeds of wisdom inside of them growing. Now, whether or not those seeds truly sprout and germinate and grow to their full potential depends on many factors. There's no guarantee. In fact, the world that we live in very often will stunt an individual's spiritual growth. But for many, I think it's sort of a, you could say, a karmic thing that despite their upbringing, which may have been void of spirituality, despite the cultural teachings that maybe spirituality is not true, that science is true, but spirituality is a bunch of hogwash. Some people, despite these messages coming to them, and maybe even despite being raised in a tradition that does not point to ultimate truth, some people will find themselves just being drawn and called and pushed through life toward the deeper truths of spirituality. And so even at a young age, they might find themselves listening to a talk like this one, or something where the very deep, difficult spiritual concept is being revealed, and somehow they find themselves understanding it and drawn to it. And this is often what I refer to as being called. And I think being called is very important, because generally that's how we find the right class, if you will. That's how we find out where we belong in spirituality. We feel called to it. As much as I wish I could get those who are in the kindergarten or grade school of spirituality to understand that there's no need to judge others or to be dogmatic or orthodox about your approach, that you can let others do what they're going to do because they'll do it anyway. You can try and kill everybody who disagrees with you. You can try and punish or put everybody in prison, but it just doesn't work. We've never had a planet united with one vision of spirituality. That's just never existed for human beings. And if I were to make a prediction, I don't think it will ever happen. What do I know, right? Maybe you're hoping for that to happen, but I think even if we look at, say, the Christian tradition, it doesn't really predict that everybody will one day get on board, despite passing laws or having wars or trying to convince everybody. It doesn't actually say, oh, everyone's going to realize the truth about the Word, God's Word, and come on board. You just have to work harder. No, it says that Judgment Day will come, at least from one understanding. Again, there's an esoteric way of understanding all of these teachings that for someone like me would make sense of these teachings. But the standard view is that Judgment Day will come, and the sinners, those who have not accepted Christ into their heart, they are going to hell for eternal damnation. Okay, so however many people there are on the planet, a certain number of them are doomed. They've had their chance and they missed it. So it would be wonderful if I or someone else could convince people that, look, you don't need to pass laws, you don't need to judge others, you don't need to scold them, punish them for not following your ways. Everyone is making sense of their spiritual journey as best as they can. Some of us, again, essentially have an advanced degree, in spirituality. And again, you just cannot deny that if there's a difference between advanced astrophysics and kindergarten. You cannot deny, you cannot say that a kindergartner can understand what's going on in advanced astrophysics. You also cannot say that if someone who signed up for an advanced astrophysics class showed up in kindergarten, that they would get nourishment from being in kindergarten. They might understand everything that's going on in kindergarten. So when it's nap time, they understand, okay, young children need to nap. That's why we're having nap time now. But they might be wishing they were working on something, an advanced equation of some sort. Again, I want to be very clear here. That does not mean the advanced astrophysics student in kindergarten is better than the kindergartners. This is, again, so often what we hear with this analogy. Many people will hear, oh, he's judging people. I am not. I am not. But there is a difference. There's a difference. There is an undeniable difference, okay? So, again, the advanced astrophysics student belongs in a collegiate level advanced astrophysics class. The kindergartner belongs in kindergarten. The difficulty with spirituality is, again, it is irrespective of chronological age. It's also irrespective of how long or how many teachers you've had, or how long you've had those teachers, or how long you've been meditating, or how long. Those things do not equate. And my teacher, one of my teachers, expressed this as Zen has to be different. Okay, my teacher, Mickey, he said Zen has to be different. And this is what he was expressing here, that other things are chronological. If you go from kindergarten and you take this class and you take that class and you do this thing and you do that thing, one day you can end up in the advanced astrophysics class. In theory, anyway. In reality, not everyone has a brain for it. That's the reality of it. That not everyone will be able to do advanced astrophysics, okay? But probably a majority, if they decided they wanted to, and if they worked at it, they could. So that's how most things work. But what did he mean by Zen has to be different? It's not going to work that way. We can meditate a short time and have a profound, life-changing experience. We might not even meditate at all. That might just come to us. This happens to people. They aren't looking for spirituality. They don't want it. They're not open to it, and yet it comes and finds them. Okay? There are many cases of this happening to people. Others are chasing it. They want it. They are making every effort, and yet it seems like their understanding is always lacking. That somehow their perspective is very much stuck in an egoic perspective of separation. So, no difference between the sacred and the profane. If I am in the kindergarten of spirituality, I am going to, no matter how much I try, I'm going to see a difference between these. I'm going to feel a difference between these. When I'm in church, I will feel very different. Church, synagogue, temple, insert whatever you want. On a yoga retreat, when I'm in those places, I'm going to feel extremely different than when I'm at the disco, or at a bar, or at school, or at work. I'm just going to experience that, and I'm going to be like, there's no way these are the same. Okay? Now again, I don't want to deny that experience, because that will be someone's, and some of you maybe, this will be your experience. And this is totally fine. So why give this talk? Well, because I want to begin to plant the seeds and make you aware that there's more. And this is a little bit like somebody saying, hey, I know you're loving kindergarten, and I know you have mastered kindergarten. You're getting great grades in kindergarten, but there's more than kindergarten. There are other grades. Now, some people will hear that and say, no, I love kindergarten. I'm not interested in anything more. But some people will hear that and, again, feel called. They will naturally feel, I'm feeling a little antsy in kindergarten. I feel like I might be wanting more than this. And so then they may be open to hearing other things that actually may contradict what they heard in kindergarten. So again, in kindergarten, you may have heard, I don't know, that in order to go from one place to another, you have to line up in a straight line. Maybe there's roll call. Everyone has to raise their hand and say that they're here. But when you get to the collegiate level, you're pretty much on your own to get from one classroom to another. They're not going to line up and have you all march together. So what was right and appropriate in kindergarten is not right and appropriate at the collegiate level. So a talk like this one is hopefully pointing to, for those that are ready, it's a call, if you will. Again, feeling called, answering the call. It's a call to those who sense that they're ready, that there might be a perspective beyond the one that they are currently comfortable with and that currently defines their reality. That, for, I'd say, most people, is going to be, again, dualistic thinking, duality. The spiritual is here, and the non-spiritual is here. I have spiritual clothes. I have not spiritual clothes. Again, some of you may wonder, well, why don't I dress up? Why do I wear street clothes when I give these talks? Why don't I try and be more spiritual? Because for me, there really isn't a difference. Clothes are clothes. I can see spiritual clothes and spiritual trappings as a tool, and I can use that tool. But when I use that tool, I will invite a certain kind of audience, and I will invite certain kinds of expectations. And at least right now, and it can change at any time, at least right now, I don't really want those things. I actually want the person who's reached the level of understanding where they don't need their spiritual teacher to look spiritual. And from the traditions that I come from and have studied, this is actually where we ultimately want to get. In the 10 Bowls, which is another Zen teaching, wonderful, beautiful depiction of the spiritual journey, the final frame, the 10th frame of the series of pictures, is the person in the marketplace. And the commentary is something like, I'm back in the marketplace and no one would know me from anyone else. What is that saying? That at that point, there are no spiritual trappings. It's not, I'm back in the marketplace and there's a halo around me, or I'm back in the marketplace and people are running up to me to hear my teaching. It's saying that you blend in. People wouldn't know that you're quote unquote spiritual, that you are realized that you're seeing reality as it is. You see the ultimate truth. You're enlightened. So these are, again, it's not about good or bad. It's not about right or wrong. These are just choices that teachers need to make. And I'm not saying there is, again, a right or wrong choice. Some of my teachers dress in robes, and they have a lot of spiritual trappings around them. They might teach only in a temple or a sacred space. There might be a lot of ritual. Again, it's not good or bad or right or wrong. They have determined for the audience that they are ready to address or speak to, and for the type of work that they want to do, that this is the appropriate way. One of my teacher's teacher, Matsuoka Roshi, Mickey's teacher, he said, you have to wear something. And people are expecting you as a Zen teacher to wear robes and to look the part. So why not do that? And I understand that perspective. Again, is that the right perspective for me? I don't think so. But for my teacher, he does. He wears robes. He does some of the things that are expected of him as a spiritual teacher, as do I. I think there are different levels at which we might operate within what is expected of us. Certain tools, certain things we might use because we find so much value in them. Are they actually more spiritual than anything else? Is some space more spiritual than this space that I'm walking in? Ultimately, no. And this is what Zen is pointing to ultimately. But again, Zen has robes. Zen has ritual. Zen has temples. Zen has sacred spaces, pilgrimages, places that you can go that are considered very important. So what you see is Zen is operating on two levels. It can operate in this world of duality, in the natural sort of human default mode of expecting there to be a difference. But it also operates at a very deep level without these expectations and without these ideas, with the understanding that ultimately there's no difference between the sacred and the profane. This is sometimes alluded to in stories in the Zen tradition. One story in particular I'm thinking of is one where a Zen master is going to retire or die, and what he'd like to do is find his successor. And so he invites all the monks under his guidance, all his disciples, to write a poem depicting their understanding of ultimate truth, ultimate reality. And everyone expects one particular monk who is perhaps the right hand of this particular teacher. They expect him to win. And indeed, when all the poems are posted, his stands out. But then the cook, I think it was the cook, and from the kitchen, puts one up. And this is actually the one that wins. And if I remember the story correctly, the Zen master says, you get my bowl, or you get the succession, basically. I think he gives him his singing bowl. And he says, now you better leave, you better run, because all these monks who've been studying and working and trying, they're going to be angry. They're not going to understand. This isn't the only story like this. There are stories of Zen masters encountering hermits, where, you know, somebody living out in the woods on their own, seemingly like almost like a homeless person, they reveal a deep level of understanding of ultimate truth. There's also a story from the yogic tradition where 3 priests hear about a very accomplished yogi who lives on an island, and they go out to the island to visit this yogi and find out more about them. They ask the yogi, "What is your practice?" And he says, "I have one mantra." And he says it and mispronounces the mantra, actually. And so these priests laugh. They think, oh, of course, this person can't even pronounce the mantra properly. You know, how advanced can they be? So they say, "Thank you for your time." They pack back into the boat and they start rowing back to the mainland, when all of a sudden the monk who is rowing and facing backwards gets bug-eyed, and the other priests are like, "What is it?" And they turn around, and what they see is this yogi running across the water toward the boat. When they were on the island, they corrected this yogi's pronunciation. They said, "That's not how the mantra goes. It goes like this." So he said, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much." Okay? So they see him running across the water toward them on the boat. They can't believe it, because none of them can do that. And he says, "I'm so sorry to bother you again. Could you tell me one more time what the pronunciation, the correct pronunciation of the mantra is?" And at that point, the monks, of course, say, "Never mind. Keep doing what you're doing." I just so love this story because, again, we're told there's one right way. And I'm not saying we should not try and pronounce mantras properly. I'm not saying there's no value in that. I'm not saying that it's wrong or bad to do that. Okay? Again, please do not put words in my mouth or try and assume you know what I'm saying, because we so often do this as human beings. We jump to conclusions. We assume. So you might hear me tell that story and then assume, oh, Doug doesn't care how I pronounce mantras. It doesn't matter how I pronounce a mantra. I'm not saying that. But there might be other considerations that are more important. And that's what this story for me points to. So much in spirituality is about orthodoxy, one right way, the one true path. And in my experience, this is not what I see. So again, today's talk is actually about understanding this to some degree. Not one, not two. No difference between the sacred and the profane. So for some people, because of their experience, and this isn't something you can buy, it's not something you can guarantee with a certain amount of time, certain amount of hours meditating. It just doesn't work that way. But for some people, their experience eventually becomes that they are living in spirituality, if you will, that the distinction of spiritual, not spiritual drops away. Just doesn't exist anymore. It's not that I can't see what people call spiritual. It's not even that things that are spiritual don't touch me. or move me in a deep way. But I also can be touched or moved in a spiritual way by a breeze, by a tree, by a dog, by a building, by a piece of secular music, by so many things. Things that aren't considered spiritual. I can be moved by these things. A great example of this is Byron Katie's spiritual awakening story. She was a very angry and scary individual. It's hard to imagine if you know her now. And she checked herself into a halfway house, a retreat center, because she just so loathed herself and she was depressed and she basically couldn't do anything. And she wouldn't sleep in the bed because she didn't feel like she was worthy of a bed. So she would sleep on the floor. And if I recall correctly, she's sleeping on the floor and she wakes up and she sees a roach on her foot. A roach, cockroach. And she woke up. In that moment, she realized that if she believes her thoughts, she suffers. But if she questions her thoughts, the suffering stops. It's very simple, isn't it? And that came from seeing that roach on her foot. I can't even say it came from, but that was what directly preceded that realization or understanding. Something very profane, not something sacred. She wasn't in a sacred temple. She was in a halfway house. She was with people who were probably alcoholics, drug addicts, people with extreme amounts of depression or anxiety, people who could not function in the world. They so could not function that they needed to be separated from the world. And yet, this amazing thing happened. She immediately checked herself out, went home, and it said that pretty much everyone immediately recognized that something had really shifted and changed within her. So, a powerful story illustrating this point. And it's something, again, if you're ready, I'm inviting you to begin to contemplate and explore this idea. I do want to caution those who are not ready to, maybe you're hearing this and you want to be ready, but you're not. So this is one other pitfall that can happen, is we too early try and do away with the distinction. And this can be as problematic, if not more problematic, than holding on to it. So if you are not ready, and even when we make this distinction, it doesn't mean we need to throw away our spiritual books, our teachers, our tradition. I still study with spiritual teachers because as far as I can tell, there's an infinite amount of things to learn. There's no one spiritual teacher who knows everything that another spiritual teacher knows. I'll repeat that. Because again, we might be tempted to think my teacher knows everything. There's no one spiritual teacher who knows everything that another spiritual teacher knows. If you're with a teacher who claims that, I would probably pack up and find another teacher. So I just naturally am curious. I also naturally like to improve. I'm not saying that makes me better or worse than anyone else. It's just a proclivity of mine. So I naturally want to study and learn from different teachers, learn different techniques, study different traditions. This is just how I am. That does not make me better or worse. It might make me better or worse for you. Some people need to study with a teacher with one firm foundation and very clear rules, if you will. Even on an advanced level, they might need that. Others may need to study with several different teachers and move around a bit, at least for a while. I think there may be a time or come a time when one should perhaps settle down or focus more on a teacher. But if you're working with someone like me, then I'm just naturally going to be learning from different sources and traditions. I can do this because in my own experience, I have clarity about what it is I'm doing. But that doesn't mean I know every technique. That doesn't mean I know the best verbiage to express a point. Again, I'm humble enough to know that there's a lot I can learn from other teachers, even teachers with quote unquote, and again, this isn't a better or worse thing. This is just recognizing the reality of the situation. Teachers with a quote unquote lesser spiritual understanding than mine, who maybe have not experienced what I've experienced, or who cannot see as clearly the level of truth or understanding. And again, it's not better or worse. It just is. But they may have developed techniques and have understandings about aspects that I don't, that I would never understand or be able to develop without their help and assistance. So this is why I will likely always have teachers. And some of those teachers might even be younger than me and less experienced than me. It doesn't mean they don't have something of value to show me and share with me. So I hope you found this helpful. If there are any questions about what I spoke about, please reach out. Leave them in the comments. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Again, leave a comment. If you enjoyed this, if you're still watching, please, if you're on YouTube, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and just say hello down in the comments. If you're on Patreon and you're supporting me, I thank you for that. If you're not, you can make a one-time contribution on PayPal or Venmo, but you can also subscribe as a patron and help support me on a monthly basis. And I'm very grateful for those of you that do that. This content would not exist. I do not have deep pockets or the resources to be able to produce these very humble videos without your assistance. So thank you. All right, everyone. Until next time, namaste and have a beautiful day.